All right. Hello and welcome to the Shelf This Book Club discussion for The Shadow of Perseus. I am Adriana from Carbon Bonded Books. I am the co-host this month, and I have with me our lovely permanent hosts.
Sure.
I don't know what to...
I never know what to call myself or like what I do with this book club. Organizer?
Yes, love it.
I don't pick the books any more often than anybody else, but we rotate hosts. So I'm very excited for today's discussion with you because I know that this is like your passion project.
Yes, this was a huge anticipated release for me. I read her other book, The Daughters of Sparta, last year and was obsessed. And that is a Trojan War retelling, which is not necessarily my hyperfixation of Greek mythology. I'm much more a fan of everything not Trojan War related. Okay. So I was really looking forward to this because it is not Trojan War. It is the story of Perseus and Medusa. So as you can guess from the title, if you are a Greek mythology person, this is a retelling of the Perseus and Medusa story told from three different perspectives: his mother, Danae, Medusa, the monster he slays, and Andromeda, his future bride / bride, depending on where you are in the story. So yeah, with that little elevator pitch out of the way, do you want to do like ratings first, or do you want me to launch into my diatribe?
I like to ask if this was on anyone's radar before it was picked for book club, or if they ever would have read it without it being chosen. If anyone wants to let us know that. And then yeah, I mean, I guess I would kind of be curious to know like who knew of the original myths before they went into it and who did not.
Yes.
I know nothing still. I held on to that I was not going to look into it because I'm not a Greek mythology girly. And so I was like, I feel like for this to work for me, it needs to like stand on its own and make sense without the background knowledge. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's a positive point for the book because I still did not look into it at all. I saved myself for you to inform me.
No, I think that's 100% fair with like any retelling. Like, I think you really should be able to enjoy it without having to know all the background.
Yes. There's also like a discussion that came up in the Discord group about something that people who did know were kind of waiting for, that I at one point was like, oh, we thought it was going to have this thing that I want to talk about later, because I was like, oh, like that could have helped me as well, because it's like I had no expectation for where the story was going because I didn't know.
Yeah. So An Owl in Her Books, didn't know about it, but glad I picked it. Great. Love it. I love when people enjoy the book that you pick. It's always so nerve-wracking to pick a book. And Danielle said it wasn't on her radar, but she was okay, cool. So it seems like most people, which doesn't surprise me because I don't think her first book was that big of a release. I didn't see it talked about much except for like in the Greek mythology girly circles.
Yeah. But I'm surprised because I feel like there has been like some very popular Greek mythology retelling releases. So I feel like it is something that does sometimes get a lot of promotion.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I mean, I guess I don't want to get too much into it, but I feel like there is definitely a certain type of Greek mythology retelling that gets a lot more hype. And I think, especially when looking at like Madeline Miller's that got like really, really big, the one that is way, way big is The Song of Achilles. And I think Circe is less popular. And I have a sneaking suspicion that it has to do with the gender of the main character. I think male focused stories are still, even though BookTube is a predominantly female dominated space, I think there still is a little bit of, but that might just be, that's just
always in all spaces. And are those, I'm not sure if you've read those.
I have read both.
More like romance focused?
The
That
Song of
also counts.
Achilles is definitely more romance focused. Circe is, I guess, more like a character study almost,
Okay.
and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really good, but it is slow. And I mean, same thing with like Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. I have
Oh,
that too. That's
yes.
basically just a character study.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I guess with that, I will kind of launch into my meta-analysis of Greek mythology retellings.
Okay.
So there are two ways to do a retelling. The first is to just, I guess, how familiar are you with Greek mythology?
0. Like,
Okay,
never read Percy Jackson, never
yeah.
like, none. Like
So Greek mythology is a collection of stories that were passed down orally as a religion.
mhm,
So, being an oral tradition, there really is no canon. There's
right.
no 100% this is the way the
The
myth is.
original, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
All of the gods are heavily involved in most of the stories. They are characters, and the Greek gods are not really, I guess they're unique in that they're basically just people with powers. Like, they're not more moral. They're not like, they're just like regular people just with powers and
Okay.
like zero
Right.
consequences. So they're just chaos incarnate.
So they're not like god figures, they're just like is what you're
They
saying.
are they are god figures in that they hold influence over
Okay.
their specific spheres, but they're not like super wise and make
Okay.
decisions you would expect to see out of a godlike figure. They make
Okay.
decisions like a regular human would make decisions.
Okay.
Um, and so oftentimes their stories feel very familiar as to what a normal person would do in that situation if they had powers and no consequences.
Fabulous.
Um, so with that, kind of the two ways to do a Greek mythology retelling is to either stick straight to the myth and say, like, this is what the god was doing, like, this is, and include like the fantasy element, all the magic, all the powers, all of that, people turning into trees, people turning into golden rain, like all of this crazy stuff. And then the other way is to look at it as kind of that oral tradition, that religion using myths to they use myths to explain the world around them.
Okay.
So I'm sure you've heard of like the Persephone and Hades retellings that
Yeah.
are like really popular. That myth was used to describe the changing of the seasons. So that myth
Oh.
is wholly there to explain when Persephone, the goddess of spring, is taken away to be with Hades. Her mother is the goddess of agriculture, got really upset and put the whole earth into winter.
Oh.
And so Persephone is only supposed to be in the underworld for like 6 months at a time. That's why winter is 6 months long,
Okay. Because
or
I do
3 months
think,
or whatever.
right, like, I feel like there's a lot of retellings of that story,
Yes,
and to me, all I knew was that, right, like,
the
she was taken
romance.
to the underworld
Yeah.
for a
So
period.
that original myth is used to describe the changing of the seasons, and that's how most of these myths are. They're used to describe like the natural world. So the
Okay.
other way to look at a retelling is to say, what story could this be retelling or explaining the natural world that would happen like in the real world, which
Okay.
is the approach that Claire Haywood takes with both this and Daughters of Sparta. What is the, I guess, thing that happened on Earth that eventually led into the
Well,
myth?
that's what I was gonna say, the first retelling way that you described to me brings up that concept of, I'll say the word, magic,
Yes.
that I was not expecting, and so right, she clearly didn't really do that in this.
Yes. So,
Yay, I'm glad she did make it.
yeah. So if you want me to just give you like a short rundown of the original myth so you have something to compare it to, I can do that.
Um, can we say our ratings first?
Oh, yes, yes, we can totally say our ratings.
Okay. So before you spoil any knowledge that I don't already know,
Yes.
I didn't think I was gonna like this because it's not up my alley, and so I read this very early in the month. It might have been at the end of last month. I read it much farther in advance than I usually do for book club, and I really loved it. And I was surprised, and I gave it a 4.5 star. So it really took me by surprise. That's kind of why I chose to still stick to not looking into it more,
Mhm.
was because I was happy with where it was sitting, and then as, more people in the book club started discussing it in the Discord group, I was getting the vibe that they were, disliking it more because they knew.
Mhm.
So that's specifically why, up to this point, I have chosen not to know.
Yeah,
I let
so
this stand for a few weeks.
yes. So I obviously know a lot about it, and I gave this book 5 stars. I was, like, telling Bailey before we went live that I think this is probably gonna be in, like, my top 10 of, like, all time. And I like, when I was young, I just liked the Greek mythology just for, like, the stories of it. They're really fun stories. There's, like, magic and things going on. As I get older, I really appreciate looking at myths in, like, the I guess, the more oral tradition way, like, what was this trying to describe?
Okay.
And so that is why I think I enjoyed this book so much. Not that this is probably what happened to make the myth happen, but, I appreciate that type of retelling. If I didn't
Hmm. So your
yeah,
enjoyment has improved.
yeah, I don't like I do love just, like, the straight retellings with the magic and everything else, but the thing I appreciate about a retelling like this is it does kinda give you more of the, I guess, intellectual exercises to be able
Right.
to connect back.
I feel a little bit removed since it's been so long
Mhm,
since I read it, but like I said before, I feel like this stood on its own as, like, each part was interesting to me, and, like, I cared about the cha I just because we both enjoyed it so much, and I know that other people who couldn't make it to the live show enjoyed it less,
mhm,
um, I would like to hear their reasons so much of, like, why, but I know, for example, that, like, a couple people said that they didn't connect to the characters or the writing, and I was surprised how much I did feel that right away. Um, yeah, I don't know.
yeah, I guess I obviously can't relate to, like,
Right,
people not enjoying this book because I loved it so much. And I can understand that, like, some things just aren't for some people.
exactly, but I also think that, like, I, as a person or fantasy reader in general, struggle to, like, grasp concepts sometimes, and
Mhm.
so, again, this is me just reiterating that going into this, I thought I wasn't gonna like it, that I was surprised how accessible and how much it did click for me.
Yeah. So 4
Oh,
stars. Kayla gave it 4 stars.
but,
So
like,
it seems like
higher than I was seeing from some people.
yeah. Like,
Fun!
I really wish Lizzie could be here
Was
because I know
here.
she didn't like
I
it.
also know that Martine I don't think she rated it as low as Lizzie, but I think that she rated it a little lower, and I know that I don't wanna speak for her, but here I am, um,
Mhm.
also is the same as me where like, Greek mythology is not a buzzword for her,
Mhm.
um, right, so those people I would love to have heard from during this.
Yeah, but they'll have to leave comments down below
Martine
when
said
they
she was
do
gonna
watch
live react when she watches it later.
it. Um,
Okay, tell me the things.
okay, so you want just I'll try to give the quickest rundown I can of the
I'm on
original
okay,
story. So the beginning starts out much the same. Danae is the daughter of a king of Argos. He gets this what am I prophecy that her son is going to kill him.
uh-huh,
So he locks her up in a stone chamber, cell, room, something. And this is where we start to deviate. Instead of a young man sneaking into her room, the god Zeus
oh.
presents himself as a shower of gold and then comes through the ceiling and then impregnates her.
Oh!
So she is impregnated by the god Zeus. That's not just a cover story in the myth.
Okay.
Yes. So in the myth, Perseus is actually a demigod, half man,
Wow.
half god. So that is like kind of the first big deviation. But again, I really like looking at it from that oral tradition and be like, yeah, obviously a woman of that time isn't going to admit that she had a child out of wedlock. She's going to
Right.
say, oh, a god impregnated me.
Exactly. Mhm.
So I appreciate that. And then so again, the king finds out that she has this baby. So
Uh-huh.
same thing as in this, he locks her up in a chest and sets her out to sea. In the myth, Zeus sees that she's set in a chest in the sea and asks his brother, who's the god of the ocean, to make sure she lands safely on an island.
Okay.
Again, she's picked up by a fisherman. In the myth, I tried to look up some other versions of the myth. I don't think I've ever seen the fisherman have a wife before, so that was
Oh,
new in this one.
okay.
But again, I think it does a lot of explaining because, like, it always was weird to me in the myth that she just lived with this fisherman for like 12 years and nothing,
Mhm.
like they never tried to get married, they never tried to get together. So
Mhm.
it makes a lot more sense in this one that he already had a family and
Right.
everything else.
Okay.
And then so again, there's kind of a time jump in the myth as well. We just kind of like skip to Perseus as an adult.
Yeah.
And the king of the island, Polydictes, in the myth is actually a bad guy. So he
Okay.
wants to marry Danae, keeps going, hey, 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 I want to marry you. She does not want anything to do with him, unlike in
Oh.
this one.
Yeah, where
So in
she's
this
kinda
one, like
for
he
it.
seems like a solid dude and you
Mm.
want to get with him, or you want her to get with
Yeah.
him. But in the myth, he's a terrible dude.
Okay.
And so you
I mean,
actually
I
have,
feel like that would paint why Perseus was so against it
yeah,
more
yeah.
than in this story.
Yeah, so in the myth, Perseus is a hero. Like he is
Right.
a good guy. um, and so Perseus is like, no, you can't do this.
Right.
The king says, because he's the king, he can kind of make Perseus do whatever he wants. He says, hey, you need to go on this quest and go kill the Gorgon Medusa.
Mm. Mhm. Okay.
So she is a no in the myth, she is a known monster. And
Okay.
so Perseus says, okay, I will do this. And if I do this, you can't marry my mom.
Okay. Where in
So,
this, it's more like they're just sending him away to become a man.
yeah,
Like, he doesn't set out on that journey knowing that he's gonna end up there.
yes.
Okay.
So he sets out, and even in the myth, Perseus is kind of useless because he gets a lot of help from the gods. He gets more help from the gods than
Oh.
I think any other hero in like Greek mythology.
Ooh, and, like, that's not really happening here, everything is of his own volition.
Yes. So
Interesting.
in the myth, he just kind of sets off in a direction, doesn't really know where he's going, what he's doing. He
Okay.
gets help from two other gods, Athena and Hermes, and they tell him, "Hey, first thing you need to do is to go find the Gray Sisters, which were a part of the Gorgon tribe. I'm sure you didn't really notice them
Heck
because they're
no.
not important characters in here.
Okay.
It's more of an Easter egg for the
Right. People who
mythology
know?
girlies." Yeah. So he gets sent to the Gray Sisters and is like, hey, I need to find Medusa. How do I go do that? And the Gray Sisters have one eye and one tooth between the three of them. You might remember that was kind of a silly little add-in when Medusa's like explaining them. She's like, they barely have an eye and a
Like,
tooth.
maybe if I had finished it yesterday, I would
Yeah.
remember, but right.
So it's added as kind of a silly little Easter egg
Okay.
where
I mean,
Medusa is explaining the Gray
that's fun
Sisters.
stuff.
Yeah. So in order to get the Gray Sisters to expose their other sisters, the Gorgons, he
Okay.
ends up stealing their eye so they can't see and is holding their eye hostage until they give him the information he needs to know. And
Okay.
so then they tell him that he needs to go to another place and get some things to help him out. And that he gets sent off to these nymphs. It's very convoluted. There's a lot going on. And so he gets sent off to these nymphs. They give him some items to help him with this quest, and they tell him where the Gorgons are. Yes, wow. And then he finds Medusa, and in the myth, she is a terrible, horrifying monster who can turn
Okay.
men to
Right.
stone with her eyes. So if
Okay.
she makes eye contact with you, you turn to stone. So he finds her while she's sleeping, slays her, and bounces.
Right, there's no, like, interpersonal relationship like there was in this a little bit.
No, he has
Okay,
no contact with her.
okay.
Um, and then on his way back, so he has flying sandals in the myth. So
Okay.
he's like not on a ship at all. He's like flying back, and that's when he sees Andromeda up on the rock and goes and
I mean, I
saves
feel like
her.
all of that information is just, like, the proof that I feel like she purposely did take out, like, the magic of this,
Yes.
and I think that was maybe a good decision for me.
Yeah. And yeah, so he saves Andromeda. They live happily ever after. And it's a very like I said, convoluted and weird story. And I was actually, like I said, doing a bunch of research. And this is a nonfiction book about certain women in Greek mythology.
To kill.
Yeah.
Oh, true. Like, he left to kill Medusa in the original, but here it just, like, kinda happens.
Yes.
Hi,
Oh, Lizzie's here.
Lizzie.
Great. Okay.
Hi,
So
Lizzie, we've been waiting for you to argue with us, please.
yes. So I guess to go against this is Nicoletta, right?
Yeah,
No, Elsa. Who's
Nicoletta.
Nicoletta? Okay, right. To go against Nicoletta a little bit. In the myth, Medusa is a horrifying monster.
Okay.
Like she's a problem that needs to be taken
Like,
care
it's a
of.
good thing that he
So it's
killed
a good thing that he
her. Okay.
is in fact taking care of it. But it has been since like the modern tradition of feminist retellings that Medusa has been given, I guess, her own backstory and a lot more sympathy. Um,
So, like, that's a
because
trend that's been happening
yes.
with retellings. Okay.
And I think something that was interesting that I read in this book, where the section that focuses on Medusa, is that this classicist, in her own interpretation of the myth, thinks that the myth was created to explain a certain symbol that had been already existing in their culture. So there's this symbol called the Gorgonion, and it is basically a head with a bunch of snakes coming off of it. And
Okay.
it was seen as like a symbol to like ward off evil, kind of like an evil eye
Yeah.
situation. So that was a symbol that I think the Greeks probably got from somewhere in the East, but this classicist thinks that this myth was made up to explain that symbol. So to give the scary head with the snakes a body and a story. So instead of being a story about Perseus, she thinks it was a story made to explain the Gorgonion, and Perseus was
Oh,
added to it later. So I thought that was kind of an interesting take.
yes. Like a story from a story. Like,
Yes.
they needed a reason why, so they made one.
Yep. That's like Greek mythology in general, is them just
Right.
making up stuff to explain what's going on around them.
And
They
then
didn't
it's
have
been told for years
science.
and years and years, and now that's just how it is.
Yep.
Right.
I like the humanization of, I just thought that the whole section was kind of boring. Like Medusa, the character, and felt very flat.
I feel like I wasn't focused because I knew that this was supposed to be about Perseus. I was always looking more for Perseus's actions and reactions. So I guess I wasn't expecting much of her as a character.
Mhm.
Um, I was not bored.
Yeah. And I guess, like, I was coming from it from because I really like her interpretation of this myth.
Okay.
Like, this is not like, I've always thought of this myth as, bringing this monster to life, and so Medusa has never been a multidimensional character. Like, it wasn't until a lot later when, like, Roman poets were starting to write Greek mythology, like,
Okay.
1,000 years later, that Medusa even got a backstory.
Mm.
So in, like, all the Greek retellings of Perseus and Medusa is just a monster that has existed. And
And
then
so
in
she only existed basically in this story that was told here for a period of time?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then when the Romans were later rewriting, they gave her a whole backstory about how she used to be a human, she got
Okay.
like, attacked in a temple, and I guess that's kind of where some of Medusa's backstory in this comes in as well. But yeah, Medusa was sexually assaulted in a temple of Poseidon, or no, a temple of Athena. Athena got pissed and turned her into a monster.
Okay.
So I guess it's like a similar thing in this one. Medusa is sexually assaulted in her hometown, and the village people attack her and cut her hair off. I don't know if you remember
Okay.
that part.
Um,
So that was like why she ended up going to this tribe of
yes.
just women, because she was running away from home.
But then also she, like, founded the island or whatever, and
No,
then was, like, wanted to let Perseus stay? I'm like, "You're supposed to be
ye
the one who says, 'No, man.'"
yeah, because she was found by the original founder of the tribe.
Okay, so she was adopted by an
Yes.
existing, okay.
It's good for a feminist. All the female characters felt very one-dimensional with maybe Danae. I really liked I loved Andromeda in this book because I feel like in Greek mythology, I don't know, like, I guess I'm coming from it from a different lens because, like, if they're one-dimensional in this book, they're zero-dimensional in
Oh,
Greek
right.
mythology.
Um, I don't know, I felt like each section as it came, I connected with and was like, wanted to know.
Yeah, because then I think especially, like,
It's
in the
to me something
Medusa,
I
I did feel like she had a lot of internal stuff going on because she is in this tribe of like only women and she is happy, but at the same time she's like missing out on this section of like wanting to have a partner and wanting to be loved. Yeah.
um,
And where was I going with that? Oh, and so like there's like the two other women in the tribe who are together and like she sees them together and wants that as well. And so finally she gets like Perseus coming around who she is interested in, but
yeah,
she has like this internal conflict of he's probably going to cause problems because he's a man, but
right.
like I want a man.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Lizzie's bringing up another retelling of this story that came out
Mhm.
recently, and it is definitely like follows like the whole magic part of it. The gods
Okay,
are like an integral part of the story. They're leading Perseus through all of the steps, and
okay.
so there's that as well.
Huh.
Yeah, Danny went through a whole
Yeah.
thing.
I guess I would admit that probably the Medusa section was the weakest, but
Yeah,
I didn't dislike it as I read it.
yeah, and I don't know. I was like so engrossed in the whole thing because once I really because when I got through the first part, I was like, all of this is fairly easy to not include the magic part. So for me, the Medusa part that was really intriguing to me is like, how are they going to take this monster
Away.
character and make it not magic?
Right.
And like, how are they going to explain why Perseus decided he needed to kill her?
That was
She's
me
just a
checking
regular
in,
woman.
saying, "Wait, there's supposed to be magic?"
Yeah. So, I mean, I was like it was like a mystery thriller for me of like,
You were
how are they
waiting
going
to
to do
see
this?
how it was gonna happen.
Yes.
Like, you knew where the plot was going, but you're waiting to see how she was gonna make it not magic.
Yes.
And
So
I was
I
like,
really
"Where are
enjoyed
we
that.
going?"
Yes.
'Cause I did still know like, in my mind, because I didn't know, the whole time was waiting to get back to obviously, they were gonna go back to the father, and it's like, is he gonna kill him? Like, in my mind, I knew we were gonna get back to that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I guess that's another funny part about, like, the original myth is he does eventually kill him, but it's, like, by total accident.
Okay.
So
That doesn't surprise me.
yeah, so he, like, because he's, like, a hero character,
Right.
so he comes back and he's, like, in these Olympic Games and throwing a discus, and the discus just happens to,
Hits
like, go off
him.
course and, like, hit that guy and
Right.
kill him, which is hilarious to me.
I mean, yeah. Again, I'm not surprised because I almost thought that that's
What was gonna happen.
yeah. Like, he
Okay.
wasn't gonna maliciously kill him, but
Yeah.
it's prophecy, it's gonna happen.
Yeah. What I enjoyed about Andromeda is she's a good representation of a woman that abusive. Yes. And I mean, I think that's also even I felt like a lot of the themes I mean, obviously, being a modern writer writing about ancient times, you're gonna try to fit modern themes into
Mhm.
that, so I think even today, a lot of women in abusive relationships feel the need to, like, make it work, and I also thought I really liked the theme of, like, the toxic masculinity
Yeah.
that Perseus, like, portrays, but, like, it's not like it's like the incel culture part of toxic
Well,
masculinity.
that's what I know at one point I said in a chat, and I was like, "Perseus, this does not make you a man."
Yeah,
But
yeah.
is that right? Like, as you're reading it and he's doing certain things, it's ick. Um, and I do think he's painted as less of a hero in this than you're describing
Mhm.
originally, and I think that's also part of making it a feminist retelling is admitting that he, while maybe being a hero.
Was not.
Right.
Well, and it's like thinking about, the time these stories were being told was very much a patriarchal time. Like,
Yeah,
none of these myths and none of the plays made based off of these myths were for women. Like,
right,
these were all for men.
right.
But I guess I understand your point, Lizzie, but to counter, I think the making them such a peaceful society really contributed to the theme of Perseus's toxic masculinity and,
Yeah,
killing someone who meant him no harm, who loved him, who wanted to give him like a chance to live and saw him for who he was, and then him killing her anyway.
yeah. I also think that part of enjoyment of this for me is that it was so short, so
Oh,
I
yeah,
think while you say that you wish it was built on more, I liked that it wasn't,
yeah.
because it still flowed and it was still just this, like, quick, to me, fun story to be told and then move on.
Also tied to my favorite, that was Perseus and Polydectes, the original.
And he turned out to be one. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I really liked the character change that this author did with Polydectes. Because I mean, going back to the other retelling that I have read that's more of that fantastical one,
Yep.
Polydectes is like the same kind of evil dude. He just wants Danae because she's young and
Uh-huh.
pretty and like unwed. I think this book didn't actually tackling lots of themes. Yes, I do too. I really liked the themes tackled in this book, and I liked Stone Blind too. I know I keep like going back and forth and contrasting, but I also gave Stone Blind 5 stars. But it's a very different book.
Different.
Like that's not a book I would recommend to people unless they are Greek mythology girlies.
Oh,
Like, because it has the fantastical elements and the gods are characters and like all that. But the themes I found in that one are very different than the themes I found in this one. And I think the themes in this are a lot more universal and timeless.
okay. I also think that's the concept too of, like, in any genre, because me saying this isn't, like, my comfort genre, you read the same thing told again so many different ways,
Yeah.
and people prefer it different ways.
Yeah.
So I think if I read Stone Blind, I probably wouldn't like it like I liked this.
I don't
But
think you would.
but right, like, there's certain friends to lovers books that I think are fantastic and that I think are terrible. Like, it's
Yeah.
everything can be told different, and
Yeah.
some
I
it's
do
gonna
think
be
this
for
was,
one person and not the next.
yeah, I loved the length of this book.
Yeah,
I thought it was tight, but it had everything in there that I
yeah.
would have wanted as someone who does love this genre.
For me, too, it being almost like a starting point,
Mhm.
it was right, it was nice to be like, "Okay, this is, a basis of what this myth is, and then now if I chose to do so, I
Mhm.
could expand on that."
Yeah. Perseus thought, what wasn't. Honestly, I thought I actually made a note of this in the book. He seemed to get more toxic when he
When he
realized he
found
was
out.
the king's grandson than
Yeah,
when he was Zeus's son. So I wonder if 'cause there is, like, a theme or not a theme, a theory in, like, among classicists that the Greek people didn't really believe in these myths. They were just fun stories to tell. So they weren't actually ways to describe the world around them, that they were just fun stories to tell around like
Mhm.
the
It's
MCU
like a fairy
of
tale.
yeah, like
Right.
yeah, a fairy tale. And so like they did have kind of this religion where like I mean, obviously it was a religious thing. They have all these temples and altars and everything else, but that people didn't really I don't know, I guess
Believe
kind of
in
the
it.
same way like some people like go to church, but
Right.
they don't think that, like, God is gonna come down and just, like, vibe with
Okay.
them on a
Right.
Saturday, like
Like, there's different levels of how seriously
yeah,
people
you
took
take
it.
this. So I wonder if the author was kinda going with that, like, kind of interpretation of this as a religion where even Perseus could kinda see through the fact that Zeus probably wasn't his dad, but he was just kinda going along with the story to make his mom happy.
What you saying realistically of right, like, a woman wasn't going to admit that she got pregnant by this man, she was gonna be like, "Yeah, I'm the 2nd Virgin Mary," like,
Yeah.
the gods did it.
No
Right.
problem.
Um, is that, like, realization of, like, truthfully, we all know that's more realistic, that she just got pregnant.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean I think knowing that he had what he felt was this birthright taken
Yeah,
away from him, I think that's what really caused him to go on this downward spiral of evil.
yeah. This is so interesting to me for you. 'Cause, like, again, I said I could go from this and expand on any of these characters
Mhm.
and get, further information in so many different directions. I wouldn't say I have a desire to do so, but I do think that me enjoying this so much does make me way more open to try something else.
Well, if you want another one that I also think is fantastic and also gave 5 stars and would actually recommend to people,
Okay.
the children's story, Say Cheese
Ooh,
Medusa.
love a good children's series.
So this is again like a fantasy one, but obviously geared towards children. But
Okay.
I really love this entire series. This is the one I've been reading for Squash That series because they're short and I can whip through them
Yes.
in like
Love that.
5 hours or whatever,
Um,
or like a couple hours. But yeah, they're very fun. But again, I mean, I don't know. I
well, no,
just
though, because like, when I think of how people get started on Greek mythology, I think Percy Jackson, and I did at one point try to read those and didn't I don't like to say I didn't like them. It just didn't click for me, it wasn't something I was interested in, so I'd be curious if I would feel the same way about another, like, middle grade type.
yeah, the thing about Percy Jackson is I mean, I've been interested in Greek mythology since I was, like, small child, so I
Right.
was already obsessed when I started Percy Jackson.
Uh-huh.
So I had all that background knowledge, and I don't necessarily think Percy Jackson does a great job of giving you everything you need to really
Okay.
appreciate that
Well,
like
'cause that series also is like, Percy Jackson is just a character who's getting introduced to these gods, right? Like,
y
he's not actually a part of myths.
no, 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 it's
Right,
like a
like, that's a
contemporary yeah.
right, okay.
Yeah, so it's just kind of using again, it's kind of like an MCU sort of situation
Mhm.
where Rick Riordan was just using these characters in a new story.
Right,
So, like, Percy Jackson is like the WandaVision of the Greek mythology
right.
MCU. Um, yeah, oh, I did wanna talk about this. I really, really appreciated what this author did with making Andromeda part of a different culture. I think a lot of Greek mythology retellings can get kind of sucked into this very narrow view of the entire Mediterranean being Greek, when in
Mhm.
reality, the Mediterranean at that time was a very diverse and
Oh, yep.
metropolitan kind of thing. So, I mean, the Greeks were like in active trade and negotiations with Egypt all the time, the northern coast of Africa, Turkey, like there was a lot going on in that
Yeah,
area, and not everybody was following the same religion.
obviously.
Even though there was a lot of overlap, like there are some Greek gods and figures that do end up in Egyptian mythology and like vice
Oh,
versa
right.
because those cultures were so tied, but they obviously didn't have the same pantheon.
Uh-huh.
But I really did appreciate that this author took the time and care to look into what a Northern African nomad tribe would be like and like come up with that character.
Right.
So I really like that. But if you like, I have been wanting to read the Penelopiad, but again, I am not a Trojan War girly, and that is a retelling of the Odyssey from
Women.
Penelope.
Okay.
But it is on my list. I do want to get to the Penelopiad at some point. Oh, Noelle made it in. I think I'm excited to come rewatch it. Okay. Yeah.
It's a quick read. Like
It is
once
very quick.
I started it, I got through it so fast.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people listened to it versus physically read it, but
I think Kayla was listening to it, wasn't she?
I think so, yes.
Which is probably helpful with some of these Greek names because they are.
Well, that's what, as you have been pronouncing, I would have pronounced her name Danae.
Yeah, I did look up the pronunciation. Oh, Noelle's also listening to it. Okay.
Awesome. And I don't think it's a very long audiobook.
Yeah. But yeah, I looked up how to pronounce the name.
Thank you.
Because I have to do that with a lot of these.
Yeah.
Because, I don't know, the Greek language is one of those that pronounces all the letters.
I'm just someone who doesn't like to think too hard as I read something. So as I read it, I'll just say it how I need to in my head. And then once you realize you have to say it out loud.
Yeah.
To discuss, right? Oh.
Okay, that is not what I got when I looked it up on Google.
The thing is, I know somebody named spelt that way that pronounces it Danae.
Yeah,
so
because
it's really hard to get.
Seen it in has like the umlaut over the A or the E, like the two dots.
Yeah.
So I think you're supposed to do like a real diphthong. I don't know. I tried to look it up, but we'll see.
I'm not the person to ask.
Okay.
Any other thoughts? Like, does anybody have a strong opinion about the ending and what she chose to do with that?
Oh, Nicoletta's Greek. Okay, perfect.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you.
Yep, perfect. Other books.
Greek retellings?
I like specifically Perseus. I don't know any other Perseus Medusa retellings, but I have lots of other ones.
Like just Greek retellings that are quick and accessible?
Yeah.
Mind?
Let's see. I gotta stand up. Now everyone's gonna see my sweats.
Your sweatpants? I also have sweatpants on, so I'll own up to it.
Let's go. Okay, so I'll just go through a quick. So Phaedra was actually for Noelle's 7 Pages book club.
Okay.
This is a retelling of, so I guess we look at, Ariadne's story. That was Theseus and the Bull.
I know you loved that one.
Yes, and Phaedra was her sister.
Oh.
So I think these are kind of fun to do together if you want them.
Do you think that the writing style in Ariadne is as accessible as this one felt?
I think it feels more formal.
Okay.
Than I think Shadow of Perseus did. So it does feel like you're kind of reading something older.
Okay.
But I mean, nothing was like too out there because I'm usually not a fan of like flowery things.
Same.
And I still felt this, even though it felt formal, was still easy to read.
Okay.
And then these are both like Trojan War ones. Electra is like Clytemnestra has become like a huge character to do retellings on, and just kind of Trojan War stuff in general. So these are both Trojan War ones. If you're interested in that story, they are both. This one is more. It's like got a little bit of light fantasy in it, and not too much, I would say. And then I think this one doesn't really have any fantasy elements, if I'm remembering correctly. And then Stone Blind was the other one, and I guess I can just pull it down. So this is the other retelling that has all of the fantasy elements.
So it's like this same story, but fantasy.
Yes.
Which is kind of intriguing to me, but realistically.
I don't know if, I don't know. You could try it. It is fun. It has a POV from Olives, which is kind of fun.
Okay.
Kind of different. And then obviously Daughters of Sparta, this author's other work. This is Trojan War, Clytemnestra, Helen of Troy, Face That
That
Launched
one also
1,000
short.
Ships. I think it's longer than this one. It's like this printing is like 370.
And does she also do the kind of like no magic thing in that one?
This one is also no magic.
Okay.
And then of course Madeline Miller, but I feel like those have been talked to death. So if you
we haven't heard of those.
Yes. Okay, so Nicoletta read. I've heard that from a lot of people that they didn't connect with Phaedra as much, and it's very slow. Like there is not a lot going on. It's almost a like crime procedural. There is like a big trial that takes place. And I think this is another one, or Phaedra's another one that's like mostly no magic. Yes. And then
I didn't realize you had read Daughters of Sparta.
Yeah, I think as much as I liked Daughters of Sparta, I do have more respect, I think, for Shadow of Perseus, because I think it's harder to make the Perseus and Medusa story no magic than it is to make this story.
Because it would have been harder to remove it from this one.
The Trojan War is basically no magic as a myth. It's based on an epic poem by Homer, and he mentions the gods, and some people are supposed to be demigods, but it doesn't really have any impact on the story. So it's a lot easier to make a Trojan War retelling no magic.
Curious what Claire Haywood. I mean, I would assume she's going to continue down this retelling path. Like what story she chooses to.
Yeah, I will also be very interested. But she is, what I have found is I really like these stories from people with degrees in the classics. So everybody I've mentioned, I think, has at least a bachelor's in classics, except for Laura Shepperson. I don't believe, the gal who wrote Phaedra, I don't think has a degree or has studied the classics in that same kind of academic setting.
This is a degree in classical civilization with a civilization and a master's degree in ancient visual and material culture. Interesting.
So I mean, like all of these authors have like read, like they all learn Greek and read the original sources in the original Greek.
Right.
And so like they're very, very familiar with all of that. And the Shadow of Perseus was a contract between the modern. Yeah, this one is definitely.
I think that's what I needed. Like I need it to be modern writing style.
Yeah.
But that's and also like classics in general not being my comfort zone. Okay, because that is kind of what I would think when I think of a Greek retelling, that it's gonna feel like a classic.
Yeah, and I think some of them are like, there's varying levels of how formal they do their writing,
right?
And depending on the story, and I think how much there is going on, I think it can add a lot, or it can make it more difficult.
Yeah,
because I feel like the formal writing in, where did I even put that, Ariadne, it wasn't bad for me because there's not a lot going on. So you can kind of like the story is slow and it makes you want to like read slower and like enjoy
Right.
more atmospheric, whatever else. But when it comes to something like a Trojan War retelling or like this story where it's like there's a lot happening, it is easier to take in all that plot if the writing's not flowery.
Right. I'm laughing at what she said after that because about Perseus carrying around a head
Oh,
in a bag.
there we go. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Because I still felt, even though it was like modern writing, like I still felt like we were not in
Modern
modern
times.
times.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm understanding everything she's saying as to why it didn't work
Click.
for
Yeah.
her, but to each their own with
Yeah.
everything, obviously.
And I guess for me, like, I've never really been in any of my books that much into the writing. Like,
Mm.
I'm not someone who notices writing a lot.
I do if it's too flowery.
Yeah.
I've been known to, like, jump in and be like, "What? Too many metaphors." Like, when it sticks out like that, but in general.
Had a more modern feel. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, if writing is something that matters to a reader, I could see why this would not vibe with them, but I've never been much into like if I did Cawpile, I would like purposefully make it so the writing part would be
Didn't
like worth
exist.
nothing, would not affect my rating at all.
I do use Cawpile, and to me, when I rate writing, it's just like, if it stood out to me in a good or bad way,
Mhm.
then that. Because there are things I read when I'm like, "That writing was terrible." Like, where it does stick out, but I would think, yeah, for the most part, when I come to the writing category, it's just like, average, yeah, good, okay.
It didn't really affect me at all.
Right.
I got the story.
Like, I'd probably give writing a lot of times just like an 8. Like, yeah, it didn't stick out.
Yeah.
I'm curious what I put for this book. None of my, because I'm on a brand new computer, stuff like
Mm.
automatically comes up when I go to type. What did I give this book? Where is this book?
That is also a very good point.
Right here.
So, yeah, like I had mentioned in the beginning, they are an oral tradition. So even in the way that like these would have originally been enjoyed, like it's very much dependent on who's telling the story. Because I'm sure there would have been some
Oh,
people
right.
who told it like I told it in the beginning, where it's just point A to point B to point C, and then there's some people who are probably
Exactly.
trying to impart like lessons
Embellish and
or
right.
story or really build up the imagery.
So I actually gave the lowest category I rated this book was the atmosphere. I
Mhm.
gave the writing a 9.
Yeah. Yeah, there really wasn't a whole lot of buildup of like the setting,
Yeah.
but I feel like that would have been probably to its own detriment if it had really tried to, because there were so many places
That's what I'm
going
saying,
on.
like, you can add all that information but then you would end up with the much chunkier book, which is also not what I want.
Yeah. And like I just don't think this story really needed it.
No.
Like I was pretty happy with where things were at.
Yeah.
Well, and especially since so much of the story takes place in like dark, like closed, cramped spaces, like
It feels
the
like each section feels isolated.
yeah.
Also, I wanted Myron to come back at the end. I'm just saying. I'm just saying. That's the one thing that I was like, "You missed out here."
Yeah.
But I get that it's probably not true to story because he didn't exist. Any other thoughts?
I don't know, I feel like I've talked everyone's like head off.
I feel informed. I feel like you telling me the original story does give context and, like,
Mhm.
the true like, it's the thing of, like, when you read a book and then go see a movie adaptation, if it's not true to the book, sometimes you're like, "Oh, I didn't like that." Like, that's the
Mhm.
same of this. If you knew the original story and then read this, it's like, it's too far from the original. But it is what it is.
Atmosphere.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, her parts were also the longest, so we gotta spend, like, the
Mhm.
most amount of time with her, and I also felt like not that she was necessarily older than the other characters we were following, but, like, she had a lot more life experience than the
Yeah.
other characters we were following, so I feel like there was time for her to, like, notice other things that were going on around her instead of
Right.
just all the internal conflict of dealing with what she was doing.
Yeah. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I thought we might get him back, but I wasn't quite sure, and I also wasn't sure what the author was gonna do with him considering he wasn't in the
Yeah.
original myth at all. Yeah, I thought that was really sweet too, actually giving Medusa a full burial and mourning her. Yes, always here to give Greek mythology info. I'm
I know it
always
sparked joy for you today.
down.
Fun time.
Yeah.
Well, anybody else have final thoughts? I don't. I had a good time, but I like just because I did.
Just because no real
Not
reason.
that deep for me, right. I don't have anything else.
Yeah, I don't think I do either.
No.
So thank you so much to everybody for joining. This is a super fun discussion for me, obviously. And hopefully we'll get some comments from those who couldn't be with us live
Yes, I look forward
later.
to that too.
And I did include the Discord for
Oh,
the
yes,
Shelf
thank
This
you.
Book Club in case anybody else hasn't been a part of it yet. Or if you find this later and want to see our discussions that we had during the reading of
Right,
the
we
book.
discuss the book throughout as we read it in Discord as well, which is a fun time.
So
Yeah.
very cool. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.